David Kim stared at his computer screen, watching numbers dance across multiple monitors in his downtown office. At 26, he had built something his parents could never quite understand. A technology company that helped banks and financial firms solve their most complex problems. The irony wasn't lost on him that while he could fix million-dollar financial puzzles for corporations, he couldn't bridge the growing gap between himself and his own family. His phone buzzed with another text from his mother, Rose. "Dinner Sunday. Don't be late again, no heart emoji. No love you." Just the bare minimum of communication that had become their norm over the past 2 years. David rubbed his temples and looked around his office. Awards lined the walls. Recognition from tech magazines, certificates from satisfied clients, even a photo of him shaking hands with the mayor at a small business ceremony. None of it seemed to matter to his parents. To them, he was still the disappointment who had chosen computers over medicine. The elevator chimed and Alex walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing paint-splattered jeans. David's heart lifted slightly, as it always did when Alex appeared. They had been together for 3 years now, and Alex was the one person who truly understood David's passion for technology and innovation. "You look stressed," Alex said, setting down a coffee cup on David's desk. "Let me guess, family dinner approaching?" David nodded. "Sunday. Same restaurant where my dad will spend 2 hours, explaining to everyone within earshot how his son could have been a doctor but chose to play with computers. Instead, Alex sat down in the chair across from David's desk. "You know what I don't understand? You're incredibly successful. You employ 12 people. You've helped hundreds of businesses. Why can't they see that?" "Because success to them means something very specific," David explained, taking a sip of his coffee. "My dad worked 16-hour days in a factory for 30 years so I could go to college. My mom cleaned office buildings at night to pay for my tutoring. In their minds, all of that sacrifice was supposed to lead to me becoming a doctor or lawyer, something they could brag about to their friends." Frank and Rose Kim had immigrated from South Korea when David was 5 years old. They had arrived with 2 suitcases, limited English, and enormous dreams for their only child. Frank found work at a manufacturing plant, while Rose took whatever cleaning job she could find. They lived in a tiny apartment and saved every penny they could for David's education. David remembered those early years clearly. His father coming home exhausted, his hands rough and stained from machinery, his mother falling asleep at the kitchen table while helping him with homework, dark circles under her eyes from working 2 jobs. They never complained, never spoke about their sacrifices. They just worked and saved and pushed David to excel in school, and excel he did. David graduated high school as valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to a prestigious university, and completed his computer science degree in 3 years. But instead of continuing to medical school as his parents had hoped, he started his own company. "The thing is," David continued, "I actually love what I do. I wake up excited about solving problems and building solutions. But to them, passion doesn't pay the bills or bring prestige." Alex leaned forward. "Have you ever thought about just sitting them down and really explaining what you do?" "Maybe if they understood." "I've tried," David interrupted. "Last year, I brought financial statements to show them how well the business was doing. My dad looked at the numbers for about 10 seconds and said, 'That's nice, but doctors help people. What do you do, help rich companies get richer?'" The conversation was interrupted by David's assistant knocking on the door. "David, your biggest client is on line 1. Says it's urgent." For the next hour, David worked through a complex security issue that had affected his client's payment system. He coordinated with programmers, spoke with bank officials, and ultimately saved the client from losing thousands of dollars in transaction fees. It was exactly the kind of problem-solving that energized him and reminded him why he loved his work. After the call ended, Alex was still there, sketching in a notebook while waiting. "See," David said, "we just prevented a financial disaster for a company that employs 300 people. If their payment system had stayed down, those employees might not have gotten paid on time. But my parents would never see it that way." Alex looked up from the sketch. "What about us? Are you going to tell them about us moving in together?" David's stomach tightened. He and Alex had been discussing moving in together for months. They had found a perfect apartment closer to David's office, and Alex had been offered a teaching position at a nearby art school. It was the natural next step in their relationship, but David knew his parents would see it differently. I have to, David said finally. I can't keep hiding this part of my life forever. We've been together 3 years. You're important to me. But Alex could hear the hesitation in David's voice. But they're going to see it as another disappointment, another way I'm not living up to their expectations. The truth was that David's parents had never really accepted Alex. They were polite during the few times they had met, but David could see the disapproval in their eyes. To Frank and Rose, Alex represented everything they didn't want for their son: uncertainty, artistic pursuits instead of stable career, and a lifestyle they couldn't understand or approve of. David's phone rang again. This time it was his mother. "David, we need to talk about Sunday dinner," Rose said without any greeting. "Your father has invited the Lees. You remember Mr. Lee? His daughter just finished her residency. She's going to be a cardiologist." David closed his eyes. He knew exactly what this meant. Another attempt at matchmaking, another reminder of the life his parents wanted him to live. "Mom, I've told you before. I'm not interested in meeting anyone. I'm with Alex." There was silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Rose spoke. "Alex is a nice person, David, but this isn't serious, right? You're young. You'll settle down eventually with someone more suitable." Suitable? David felt his frustration rising. "Alex is kind, talented, and makes me happy. What's not suitable about that?" "Don't raise your voice at me," Rose said sharply. "We just want what's best for you. A stable family, children, a respectable career. Is that too much to ask?" After hanging up, David sat quietly for several minutes. Alex watched him with concern. "What did she say?" "They've invited someone to dinner." Another setup. David looked out the window at the city skyline. "I think it's time to have that conversation. All of it. The business, us, everything." Alex reached across the desk and took David's hand. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" David squeezed Alex's hand. "I'm tired of living 2 different lives. They need to know who I really am and what actually makes me happy, even if they don't like it." Neither of them could have predicted how dramatically that conversation would change everything. Sunday arrived faster than David had hoped. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. Alex sat on the edge of the bed watching him with a mixture of support and worry. "You don't have to do this all at once," Alex said softly. "Maybe just test the waters first." David shook his head. "I've been testing the waters for 3 years. It's time to either swim or drown." The drive to his parents' house felt longer than usual. David had grown up in this neighborhood, a modest area where most families were 1st or 2nd generation immigrants working hard to build better lives for their children. Every house held stories of sacrifice and dreams of success. He parked outside the familiar 2-story home with its small but perfectly maintained garden. His mother took pride in that garden, spending hours each weekend making sure every flower was perfect. It was one of the few luxuries she allowed herself. Inside, the smell of his mother's cooking filled the air. Korean barbecue, kimchi, and all the side dishes that had been Sunday dinner staples throughout his childhood. The dining room table was set for 5 people, and David's heart sank when he saw the extra place setting. "David," his mother appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Come. I want you to meet someone special." Sitting at the table was a young woman in her late 20s, dressed professionally in a navy blue dress. She stood up and bowed slightly when she saw David. "This is Dr. Jennifer Lee," Rose said proudly. She just completed her cardiology residency at the university hospital. "Jennifer, this is my son David." David shook Jennifer's hand politely. She seemed nice enough, but he could see the calculation in his mother's eyes. This wasn't just dinner. It was an audition. Frank emerged from the living room where he had been watching the news. "David, good to see you. Dr. Lee was just telling us about her work at the hospital. Very impressive. She saves lives every day." The emphasis on saves lives wasn't lost on David. His father had a way of making points without being direct about it. They sat down to dinner, and for the first 30 minutes the conversation stayed safe. David's parents asked Jennifer about her work, her family, her plans for the future. She answered politely, occasionally glancing at David with what seemed like genuine interest. "So David," Jennifer said during a pause in conversation, "your mother tells me you work with computers. That must be interesting." "I run a technology consulting firm," David explained. We help financial institutions solve complex problems with their systems. Oh, that's nice, Jennifer replied. But David could see she didn't really understand what that meant. Most people didn't. Frank leaned forward. David is very smart with computers, but he could have been anything. Top of his class in college. Could have gone to medical school, law school, anything. Dad, please. David felt the familiar frustration rising. What? It's true. Dr. Lee, you understand the importance of using your talents to help people, right? Jennifer nodded uncertainly, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. Rose served dessert and tried to lighten the mood. David, you should show Jennifer your awards. He has so many certificates and trophies in his old room. Actually, David said, setting down his fork, there's something I need to tell you all. The table went quiet. Alex had prepared him for this moment. But sitting here with his parents' expectant faces and Jennifer looking confused, David felt his carefully planned speech disappearing. I'm moving in with someone, David said finally. Rose's face lit up. Oh, that's wonderful news. Is she someone from your work? No, Mom. It's Alex, the person I've been dating for 3 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Frank's chopstick stopped halfway to his mouth. Rose blinked several times as if she hadn't heard correctly. Jennifer looked around the table, clearly wishing she was anywhere else. Alex, Rose repeated slowly. But Alex is… Yes, David said quietly. Alex and I are together. We love each other, and we're moving in together next month. Frank set down his chopsticks with more force than necessary. This is not appropriate dinner conversation, David. It's my life. Dad? And I'm tired of pretending it's something else. Dr. Lee, Rose said quickly, turning to their guest. Perhaps you should… I should go, Jennifer said, standing up immediately. Thank you for dinner. It was lovely meeting everyone. She practically ran from the house, leaving the 3 family members alone with the weight of unspoken words. Frank waited until he heard Jennifer's car pull away before speaking. How could you embarrass us like that? In front of Dr. Lee? I didn't mean to embarrass anyone, David said. But I wasn't going to sit here and pretend to be someone I'm not. This is a phase, Rose said firmly. You're confused right now, but you'll figure it out. You just need to focus on the right things. Mom, this isn't a phase. I've been with Alex for 3 years. We're happy together. Frank stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is unacceptable. We didn't sacrifice everything so you could throw your life away. How am I throwing my life away? I have a successful business. I'm happy. I'm in love with someone who supports me. You're 26 years old, Frank said, his voice rising. You should be thinking about marriage, children, building a real future, not playing house with someone who draws pictures for a living. David felt anger flare in his chest. Alex is a talented artist and teacher, and what we have is real. Rose tried a different approach. David, honey, we're not saying Alex is a bad person, but this lifestyle, it's not what we want for you. Think about your future. Think about us. What about my happiness? David asked. Happiness? Frank laughed bitterly. I worked in a factory for 30 years. Your mother cleaned offices until her hands bled. We weren't thinking about happiness. We were thinking about building something better for you. And I appreciate that, David said. But I can't live my life just to fulfill your dreams. The argument escalated from there. Voices rose, old grievances surfaced, and 3 years of careful politeness crumbled away. Frank accused David of being selfish and ungrateful. Rose cried and pleaded with him to come to his senses. David tried to explain his feelings, his success, his genuine love for Alex, but his words seemed to bounce off his parents like they were speaking different languages. Finally, Frank delivered the ultimatum that would change everything. You have a choice, he said, his voice cold and final. You can continue down this path or you can be our son, but you can't have both. David stared at his father in disbelief. You're asking me to choose between my family and the person I love? We're asking you to choose between right and wrong, Rose said through her tears. And if I choose Alex? Frank's jaw tightened. Then you're no longer welcome in this house. David looked around the dining room where he had eaten thousands of meals, done homework, celebrated birthdays. Family photos lined the walls, pictures of him graduating, receiving awards, smiling with his parents at various events. It felt surreal that it could all end here over dinner on a Sunday evening. I love Alex, David said quietly, and I'm not going to apologize for that. Frank nodded slowly as if David had confirmed something he had expected. Then you've made your choice. What happened next felt like a dream, or rather a nightmare. Rose went upstairs and returned with a suitcase which she began filling with David's belongings from his childhood room. Frank went to the garage and brought back boxes, methodically packing up anything that belonged to his son. "You can get the rest later," Frank said, not looking at David. "When we're not here." David stood in the driveway an hour later, his car loaded with hastily packed boxes and a suitcase. His parents watched from the front door and he could see his mother crying. But neither of them moved to stop him or take back their words. As he drove away, David had no idea that his departure would soon trigger a financial crisis that would threaten to destroy everything his parents had worked so hard to build. David sat in his car outside Alex's apartment building, staring at his phone. 3 missed calls from his mother and 2 text messages asking him to please call home. It had been 2 days since the disastrous dinner, and the silence from his father was somehow worse than his mother's desperate attempts to reach out. Alex appeared at the passenger door, tapping on the window. "Are you planning to sit out here all night?" David unlocked the door and Alex slid in beside him. "How are you holding up?" "I keep thinking about something," David said, not answering the question directly. 3 years ago, when I started making real money from the business, I did something my parents don't know about." Alex waited, sensing this was important. "I was worried about them," David continued. "My dad was 58, still working those long shifts at the factory. My mom's arthritis was getting worse from all those years of cleaning offices. They never complained, but I could see they were struggling." David pulled out his laptop and opened it on his lap. Alex watched as he logged into several different accounts: bank accounts, investment portfolios, and what looked like a complex financial management system. "What is all this?" Alex asked. "This is the Chen Family Financial Trust," David said quietly. "I established it 18 months after my company started turning a real profit." The screen showed a web of financial transactions, all flowing toward accounts belonging to Frank and Rose Kim. David scrolled through months of entries: mortgage payments, utility bills, insurance premiums, even payments to the local grocery store where his parents shopped. "David, what are you showing me? For the past 3 years, I've been paying for almost everything in my parents' lives." "They don't know it's me." Alex stared at the screen in disbelief. "Everything?" David nodded. "Their mortgage payment gets made automatically through something that looks like a bank assistance program." "The factory where my dad works?" "I've been anonymously supplementing his salary through what appears to be performance bonuses. My mom's medical bills for her arthritis treatment, covered by a mysterious insurance upgrade that she thinks the cleaning company provided." He clicked through more screens, showing Alex the elaborate system he had created. Every payment was designed to look like it came from somewhere else: government programs, employer benefits, insurance companies, or financial institutions. "How much money are we talking about?" Alex asked. "About $4,000 a month," David said. "Sometimes more when they need something special. Like when their roof needed repairs last year, or when Mom needed that expensive medication." Alex was quiet for a long moment, processing what David had just revealed. "Why didn't you tell them it was you?" David closed the laptop and leaned back in his seat. "Because they would have refused the help. You know how proud they are. My dad would have seen it as charity, as me looking down on them. He would have been insulted. But David, this is incredible. You've been taking care of them this whole time, even while they were criticizing everything about your life." "I wanted to tell them," David said. "I had this whole plan. Next month is their 30th wedding anniversary. I was going to reveal everything then, show them how successful the business really was, and explain that all the help they'd been receiving came from the son they were so disappointed in." The irony of the situation hit Alex like a physical blow. "And now?" David was quiet for a long time. Then he started the car. "Now I don't know what to do." They drove to their new apartment, a bright 2-bedroom place with large windows that Alex had fallen in love with immediately. As they carried boxes upstairs, Alex kept thinking about what David had revealed. The financial trust wasn't just about money. It was about love expressed in the only way David knew how, when direct emotional connection had become impossible. That evening, as they unpacked boxes in their new home, Alex brought up the subject. "T again. Are you going to keep making the payments?" David paused, holding a stack of books. "I don't know. Part of me wants to stop everything immediately, Let them see what happens when their mysterious benefactor disappears. But they're still my parents, and they really don't know that I'm the one who's been helping them. Alex sat down on the floor next to a half-empty box. Walk me through how this all works. How did you manage to hide that it was you? David joined Alex on the floor and explained the system he had spent months designing. He had created several shell companies with generic names like Metropolitan Financial Services and Community Development Partners. These companies existed solely to make payments on behalf of the trust. When his parents received their mortgage assistance, it came from Metropolitan Financial Services, with official-looking paperwork explaining it was part of a community support program for long-term residents. His father's salary supplements appeared to come from the factory's corporate office, complete with fake performance reviews that David had a contact help him create. The medical insurance upgrades came through the cleaning company where his mother worked part-time. David had actually approached the company's owner, explained the situation partially, and arranged to funnel money through their benefit system. The owner thought David was just a generous client who wanted to help one of their employees. The grocery store credits were the trickiest, David explained. I had to convince the owner that there was a new loyalty program for senior customers. I've been sending him money every month to cover my parents' groceries, and he thinks it comes from some corporate sponsorship program. Alex shook their head in amazement. This is like something out of a movie. How did you keep track of everything? Spreadsheets, David said with a slight smile. Lots and lots of spreadsheets. And I had to be careful about timing. I couldn't let any payments be late because that would make my parents suspicious. But I also couldn't make them too generous because that would seem unrealistic. The more Alex learned about the system, the more impressive and heartbreaking it became. David had essentially become his parents' secret guardian angel, protecting them from financial stress while they remained completely unaware of his sacrifice. What happens if you stop the payments? Alex asked. David's expression grew serious. Everything falls apart pretty quickly. The mortgage payment is due in 12 days. Dad's next paycheck will be about $600 short without the supplement. Mom's medication costs almost $300 a month without the insurance help. And they'll have no idea why everything is suddenly going wrong? None at all. They'll think all these programs and benefits just randomly disappeared. They'll probably blame the government or the economy or just bad luck. Alex could see the conflict in David's eyes. Despite everything his parents had said, despite being thrown out of their house and told he was no longer their son, he was still protecting them from a financial disaster they didn't even know was possible. Have you thought about telling them the truth now? Alex asked gently. Every 5 minutes, David admitted. But what would I say? Hi, Mom and Dad. I know you disowned me, but by the way, I've been secretly paying all your bills for 3 years. They'd either think I was lying or they'd be so humiliated they'd never speak to me again anyway. That night, David sat at his computer until nearly 3 in the morning, staring at the payment system he had built. His finger hovered over the controls that would either continue the monthly transfers or stop them permanently. In 12 days, his parents would receive a notice that their mortgage assistance program had been discontinued. In 2 weeks, his father would get a paycheck that was hundreds of dollars smaller than expected. In 3 weeks, his mother would go to pick up her medication and discover her insurance no longer covered the cost, and they would have no idea that their son, the one they had rejected and thrown away, held the power to save them or let them fall. David closed the laptop without making a decision, but he knew time was running out. 3 weeks after David moved out, Rose Kim stood in the kitchen holding an envelope that made her hands shake. The return address read, First National Bank Mortgage Services, and the bold red text across the front said, Urgent, payment required. She opened it carefully, reading the notice twice before calling for her husband. Frank, come here, please. Frank emerged from the living room where he had been watching the morning news. He took one look at his wife's face and knew something was wrong. What is it? Rose handed him the letter. They're saying our mortgage assistance program has been canceled. Effective immediately. Frank read the notice, his frown deepening with each line. This doesn't make sense. We've been getting this help for over 2 years. Why would they just stop it? The letter explained that due to budget constraints and program restructuring, the Metropolitan Financial Services Assistance Program was being discontinued. All beneficiaries were expected to resume full mortgage payments starting with the next billing cycle. How much is our regular payment supposed to be? Rose asked, though she was afraid of the answer. Frank went to the filing cabinet and pulled out their original mortgage documents. His face went pale as he found the number. $2,800 a month. $2,800? Rose sat down heavily at the kitchen table. But we've only been paying $1,200. They had gotten so used to the reduced payment that they had almost forgotten what their original mortgage amount was. The assistance program had been such a blessing that they had built their entire budget around the lower payment. Frank calculated quickly in his head. With his factory salary and Rose's part-time cleaning job, they brought home about $4,000 a month. After utilities, food, car payments, and other expenses, there was no way they could afford an additional $1,600 for the mortgage. Maybe there's been a mistake, Rose said hopefully. I'll call them and explain that we still need the help. She spent the next hour on the phone being transferred from one department to another. Each person she spoke to was polite but unhelpful. The program had been discontinued, they all said. There was nothing they could do. Did they say why? Frank asked when she finally hung up. Budget cuts. The representative kept saying that Metropolitan Financial Services had to reduce their community assistance programs. Frank had never heard of Metropolitan Financial Services before they started receiving the mortgage help, but he had assumed it was some kind of government program or bank initiative. Now he wondered if they should have asked more questions when the assistance first started. 2 days later, Frank opened his paycheck and stared at the amount in disbelief. It was $637 less than he had been expecting. He marched into his supervisor's office at the factory. There's been a mistake with my pay. His supervisor, Mr. Torres, looked at the pay stub Frank handed him. I don't see any mistake. This looks right to me. But where are my performance bonuses? I've been getting them every month for the past 2 years. Mr. Torres looked confused. Performance bonuses? Frank, we don't have a performance bonus program here. We haven't had anything like that for at least 5 years. Frank felt like the ground was shifting under his feet. But I've been getting extra money every month. The paperwork always said it was for good performance and attendance. I handle all the payroll, Frank. You get your base salary, overtime when you work it, and that's it. There's no bonus program. Frank left work that day feeling completely bewildered. He drove home slowly, trying to make sense of what was happening. First, the mortgage assistance disappears. Now his mysterious bonuses were gone too. It felt like someone had pulled a rug out from under his entire life. At home, Rose was dealing with her own crisis. She had gone to pick up her arthritis medication and been told that her insurance no longer covered it. The pharmacy says there was some kind of upgrade to my insurance. That's been canceled, she explained to Frank. Now I have to pay the full price, $320. $300 for 1 month of pills? Rose nodded miserably. I called the cleaning company, but they said they never offered any insurance upgrades. The woman in HR said I must be confused. Frank sat down at the kitchen table and spread out all their bills. Without the mortgage assistance, the performance bonuses, and Rose's insurance help, they were looking at a monthly shortfall of over $2,000. How did this happen? Rose asked. Everything was going so well, and now it's all falling apart at once. I don't know, Frank said, but he was starting to get a terrible feeling in his stomach. The next week brought more bad news. Rose went to the grocery store where they had been getting significant discounts through what they thought was a senior citizen loyalty program. The cashier scanned Rose's card and shook her head. I'm sorry, Mrs. Kim, this card isn't working anymore. The computer says the account has been closed. Rose tried to explain about the loyalty program, but the store manager was just as confused as everyone else had been. We don't have any special senior programs like what you're describing, he said kindly. Are you sure you weren't shopping somewhere else? But Rose knew she had been shopping there for months, getting 30 to 40% off her groceries every week. She had even recommended the store to her friends because of the great discount program. Walking to her car with a grocery bill that was twice what she had expected to pay, Rose felt tears burning her eyes. Everything that had made their lives comfortable and manageable seemed to be disappearing at once. That evening, Frank and Rose sat at their kitchen table surrounded by bills they couldn't pay. The phone had been ringing constantly with calls from creditors, but they had stopped answering it. Maybe we should call David, Rose said quietly. Frank's jaw tightened. No, Frank, we might lose the house. And David, he's successful. Maybe he could help us understand what's happening, or we made our decision, Frank interrupted. He made his choice and we made ours. We don't go crawling back now. But privately, Frank was beginning to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. Not just about David's personal life, but about something bigger. The timing of all these financial problems seemed too coincidental. Everything had started falling apart right after David left. Rose picked up her phone and scrolled to David's number. She had typed and deleted a dozen text messages over the past few weeks, but had never sent any of them. Her pride warred with her desperation. What if we just called to see how he's doing? She suggested. Not to ask for help, just to talk. Frank was quiet for a long moment. Then he shook his head. If we call him now, he'll know it's because we need something. How does that look? Rose put her phone down, but she kept staring at it. Outside, Mrs. Chen from next door was watering her garden. Rose remembered how Mrs. Chen had mentioned seeing David's car in their driveway late at night sometimes. But that seemed impossible. David hadn't visited them late at night in years, or had he? A strange thought began to form in Rose's mind, but it seemed too incredible to believe. She pushed it away and focused on the immediate crisis. They had 12 days before the mortgage payment was due in full, and no idea how they were going to pay it. What Frank and Rose didn't know was that their neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had been keeping track of David's visits more carefully than they realized. And tomorrow, she was going to share information that would change everything. Rose was loading another box into her car when Mrs. Chen appeared at the fence between their properties. The older woman had been watching the Kims pack their belongings all morning, and her face showed deep concern. "Rose, dear, what's happening? Are you moving?" Rose straightened up, trying to compose herself. She had been crying on and off for days, and her eyes were red and swollen. "We're losing the house, Mrs. Chen. We have to be out by the end of the week." Mrs. Chen's hand flew to her mouth. "Losing the house? But how? I thought everything was going so well for you two." "So did we," Rose said bitterly. "But apparently all the programs that were helping us got canceled at the same time. It's like someone just flipped a switch and made our whole life fall apart." Mrs. Chen looked confused. "Programs? What programs?" Rose found herself explaining about the mortgage assistance, Frank's performance bonuses, her insurance upgrades, and the grocery discounts. As she talked, Mrs. Chen's expression grew more and more puzzled. "Rose," Mrs. Chen said slowly, "I need to tell you something about David." Rose's heart skipped. "What about David?" "I've been seeing his car here for years. Late at night, usually around midnight or 1 in the morning, he would park down the street and walk to your house." "That's impossible," Rose said. "David hasn't visited us late at night since he was in college." Mrs. Chen shook her head. "No, dear. I'm a light sleeper, and I noticed because it happened so regularly. At least twice a month for the past few years. I always wondered why he came so late when you were already asleep." Rose felt something cold settling in her stomach. "Are you sure it was David?" "Positive. I saw him clearly many times under the streetlight. He would spend maybe 30 minutes at your house, then leave. I assumed you knew." Mrs. Chen paused, looking uncomfortable. "Rose, there's something else. Last month, right after that big argument you had, the whole neighborhood heard the shouting. The visit stopped completely. Rose's legs felt weak. She leaned against her car for support. "Mrs. Chen, you're saying David was coming to our house secretly for years and he stopped right after we told him to leave? I'm sorry, dear. I thought you knew. I thought maybe he was helping with yard work or house repairs while you slept." Rose's mind was racing. Late-night visits that stopped exactly when their financial problems started. It couldn't be a coincidence. "Mrs. Chen, I need to use your computer. Please." An hour later, Rose sat in Mrs. Chen's kitchen staring at a laptop screen, her hands shaking as she typed. She had called Frank home from work, claiming it was an emergency. When he arrived and saw her face, he knew something significant had happened. "I hired someone," Rose said without explanation. "A private investigator." "You did what?" "To trace where our mortgage assistance was really coming from. And the bonuses. And everything else." Frank sat down heavily. "Rose, we can't afford a private investigator." "Mrs. Chen paid for it," Rose said. "She wanted to help. And Frank, you need to see this." The investigator had worked fast. Within hours, he had traced the financial paper trail that David had spent months carefully constructing. Every shell company, every fake program, Every mysterious benefactor led back to one source, David Kim's business accounts. The computer screen showed bank records, transaction histories, and corporate filings. Metropolitan Financial Services was registered to David's business address. The factory's performance bonus program was funded through monthly transfers from David's company. The insurance upgrades, the grocery discounts, even the small repairs that had been mysteriously paid for over the years, all of it came from their son. Frank stared at the screen in silence for several minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "He's been taking care of us this whole time." Rose was crying again, but these were different tears. "Frank, we threw him out. We told him he wasn't our son anymore. And he was making sure we were okay," Frank finished. "Even when we were criticizing everything about his life, he was protecting us." The investigator's report estimated that David had spent over $140,000 supporting his parents over 3 years, money he had earned through the technology business they had dismissed as unimportant. Mrs. Chen brought them tea with shaking hands. She had been reading over their shoulders, and she was crying too. "That boy," she said, "that sweet boy was taking care of you all this time." Frank stood up abruptly and walked to the window. "How do we face him after this? How do we tell him we know?" "We have to," Rose said. "Frank, we have to call him." "And say what?" "Sorry we disowned you, but thanks for paying our bills." Rose pulled out her phone. "We say we were wrong. About everything." David was in a client meeting when his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and saw his mother's name. It was the first time she had actually called since the dinner 3 weeks ago. He let it go to voicemail, but she called again immediately, and then again. "Excuse me for just a moment," David told his client, stepping into the hallway. "David?" His mother's voice sounded strange, shaky, and urgent. "Mom, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" "David, we know." David's heart stopped. "Know what?" "We know about the money. The mortgage, the bonuses, everything. We know it was you." David closed his eyes and leaned against the wall. "Mom, why?" Rose's voice broke. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because you would have refused the help. You know you would have. But David, all this time we were so hard on you, and you were taking care of us." David could hear his father's voice in the background, though he couldn't make out the words. Then Frank took the phone. "Son," Frank said, and his voice was thick with emotion, "I need to see you. We need to talk." An hour later, David stood on the front porch of his childhood home for the first time since being thrown out. His parents opened the door before he could knock, and the sight of them shocked him. They looked like they had aged years in just 3 weeks. His mother's eyes were red from crying, and his father's usual stern expression had been replaced by something David had never seen before. "Shame." "Come in," Rose said quietly. "Please." They sat in the same living room where David had grown up, but everything felt different now. The financial documents were spread across the coffee table like evidence of a crime. "We're losing the house," Frank said without preamble, "because I was too proud and too stupid to see what was right in front of me." David looked at the foreclosure notice on top of the pile. "Dad, I can—" "No," Frank interrupted. "Don't offer to fix this, not yet. First, I need to say something." Frank stood up and walked to the mantelpiece where dozens of David's childhood photos were displayed. Photos of school awards, graduation, family vacations. "I spent 30 years thinking I knew what success looked like," Frank said. "I thought it had to look like a doctor or a lawyer or something I could brag about to my friends. But he turned to face his son. "You built something incredible. You became successful enough to take care of your parents without us even knowing, and instead of being proud, I threw you away." Rose was crying again. "David, can you ever forgive us?" David looked at his parents, really looked at them. They were smaller than he remembered, more fragile. The past 3 weeks had been hard on all of them. "There's nothing to forgive," David said finally. "You're my parents. Taking care of you wasn't a burden. It was the only way I knew how to show you that I loved you, even when you couldn't love who I was." Frank sat back down, and for the first time in years, he reached over and put his hand on his son's shoulder. "Can we try again?" Frank asked. "All of us? Can we try to be a family again?" David looked around the room at the boxes packed for moving, at his parents' worried faces, at the evidence of 3 years of secret love and sacrifice. "Yes," he said, "but this time no secrets. And Alex is part of this family too." Rose wiped her eyes and smiled for the first time in weeks. I'd like to meet Alex properly. Maybe we could have dinner. A real dinner this time. 2 hours later, David made a series of phone calls that restored his parents' mortgage assistance, insurance coverage, and grocery discounts. But more importantly, they had something that couldn't be bought with money. A second chance to love each other as they really were.